Dennis Lillee was just 20 years old. He wasn't the famous cricket star yet. He was just a young man from Perth, Australia, trying to make it in the world. Dennis had big dreams of playing cricket for his country, but dreams don't pay the bills. Dennis was struggling to make ends meet. He was working part-time jobs and going to technical college. Money was tight, really tight. Some days, he wasn't sure if he could afford his next meal. The pressure was getting to him. Like many young people, Dennis had to balance work, school, and his passion for cricket. It wasn't easy. He would wake up before dawn to practice cricket. Then, he would rush to classes. After classes, he would work whatever job he could find. By the time he got home, he was exhausted. Dennis was talented, but talent alone doesn't guarantee success. He needed support. He needed someone to believe in him. Little did he know that someone was working right under his nose at the college. The technical college where Dennis studied wasn't fancy. It was a simple building with basic classrooms. The hallways were long and sometimes empty. But these hallways held a secret that would change Dennis's life forever. Frank Thompson was 45 years old in 1969. He had been working as a janitor at the technical college for over 15 years. Frank was the kind of man who noticed everything but said little. He saw students come and go. He watched them struggle and succeed. Frank had a special gift. He could see potential in people even when they couldn't see it in themselves. He noticed Dennis Lillee right away. There was something different about this young man. Dennis had fire in his eyes. He had determination. But Frank also saw something else. He saw that Dennis was struggling. He noticed that Dennis often looked tired and hungry. Frank saw Dennis counting coins in the cafeteria, trying to decide if he could afford lunch. One day, Frank approached Dennis in the hallway. "You're the cricket player, aren't you?" Frank asked with a warm smile. Dennis was surprised. He didn't think anyone at college knew about his cricket dreams. "Yeah, I play a bit," Dennis replied, trying to sound casual. But Frank could see right through him. He could see how much cricket meant to this young man. "I've heard good things about you," Frank said. "Keep at it, son. I have a feeling you're going to make it big." Those simple words meant more to Dennis than Frank could ever know. Someone believed in him. Someone saw his potential. That conversation was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. From that day on, Frank made it his mission to help Dennis in small ways. He would save leftover food from college events and quietly give it to Dennis. He would slip a few dollars into Dennis's locker when he thought no one was looking. Frank's help wasn't obvious. He was careful not to embarrass Dennis. Frank understood pride. He knew that young men like Dennis didn't want charity. They wanted to earn their way. So Frank found clever ways to help. Sometimes Frank would accidentally leave sandwiches in places where Dennis would find them. Other times he would tell Dennis about odd jobs around the college that paid a few extra dollars. "Hey Dennis," Frank would say, "I heard the gym needs someone to help move equipment this weekend. Pays pretty well if you're interested." Dennis always took these jobs. He was grateful for the extra money, but he didn't realize that Frank was often paying for these jobs out of his own pocket. Frank would talk to the college staff. "That Lillee boy is a good worker." He would tell them, "If you need help with anything, he's your man." Frank was always looking out for Dennis, even when Dennis didn't know it. But Frank's support went beyond money and food. He became Dennis's biggest cheerleader. Whenever Dennis had a cricket match, Frank would try to watch if he could. He would cheer from the sidelines, proud as if Dennis were his own son. "How did the match go?" Frank would ask Dennis on Monday mornings. Dennis would light up talking about cricket. Frank could see the passion in the young man's eyes. He knew Dennis was special. Frank never talked about his own life much. Dennis knew he was married and had grown children, but Frank always kept the conversation focused on others. That was just Frank's way. He was more interested in helping than in getting credit. In 1971, Dennis's hard work started to pay off. He was selected to play for Western Australia. It was a huge step forward in his cricket career. The first person Dennis wanted to tell was Frank. "Mr. Thompson, I made the state team," Dennis said, running up to Frank in the college hallway. Frank's face broke into the biggest smile. "I knew it," he said. "I told you that you were going to make it big. This is just the beginning, son." Frank was right. Dennis's career took off like a rocket. By 1971, he was playing for Australia. The shy young man who used to count coins for lunch was now representing his country on the cricket field. But success didn't change Dennis. He still remembered Frank's kindness. Whenever Dennis came back to Perth, he would visit the college to see Frank. They would sit and talk about cricket, life, and dreams. "You remember when I used to worry about buying lunch?" Dennis would laugh. "I remember a young man with big dreams and the determination to make them come true," Frank would reply. As Dennis became more famous, he tried to help Frank. He offered to give Frank money or help him find a better job, but Frank always refused. "I'm happy where I am," Frank would say. "I like helping young people like you. That's reward enough for me." Dennis respected Frank's choice, but he never forgot the debt he owed to this kind man. In the back of his mind, Dennis always planned to find a way to repay Frank's generosity. By 1975, Dennis Lillee was one of the most famous cricketers in the world. He was playing in packed stadiums and earning good money. But he never forgot the humble janitor who helped him when he had nothing. As Dennis's career grew bigger, his life became busier. He was traveling around the world, playing cricket in different countries. Months would go by between visits home to Perth. The last time Dennis saw Frank was in 1976. Frank was still working at the college, still helping students, still being the kind man Dennis remembered. They had a good talk that day. Frank was proud of everything Dennis had accomplished. "You've done well for yourself," Frank said. "But more importantly, you've stayed a good person. That matters more than any trophy." Dennis promised to visit more often, but life got in the way. His cricket career was at its peak. He was playing match after match, tour after tour. Time flew by faster than Dennis realized. Years passed, then decades. Dennis would sometimes think about Frank and wonder how he was doing. He assumed Frank had retired long ago. After all, Frank wasn't young when Dennis knew him in the 1970s. Dennis tried calling the college a few times over the years, but the staff had changed. No one seemed to remember Frank Thompson. Dennis figured Frank had moved away or passed away. It made him sad to think he never got to properly thank Frank for everything. In his quiet moments, Dennis would remember Frank's kindness. He would think about those sandwiches that appeared when he was hungry. He would remember Frank's encouraging words when Dennis doubted himself. Dennis became successful beyond his wildest dreams. He played 70 test matches for Australia. He took 355 wickets. He was inducted into the Cricket Hall of Fame. But success couldn't fill the regret he felt about losing touch with Frank. "I should have done more," Dennis would tell his wife. "Frank helped me when I had nothing. I should have found a way to stay in touch." In 2019, Dennis got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a journalist writing a story about the technical college Dennis had attended. The journalist was researching famous alumni. "I'm trying to verify some details about your time at the college," the journalist said. "I spoke with some of the long-time staff members." Dennis was happy to help. He shared memories about his college days and his cricket training. Then the journalist said something that made Dennis's heart skip a beat. "One of the staff members mentioned that Frank Thompson still talks about you sometimes. He's quite proud of your success." Dennis almost dropped the phone. "Frank Thompson? He's still alive?" "Oh yes," the journalist said. "He's still working at the college actually. He's 95 years old now, but he comes in a few days a week. Amazing man." Dennis couldn't believe it. Frank was still alive. Not only alive, but still working. At 95 years old, Dennis immediately asked for Frank's contact information. That night, Dennis couldn't sleep. His mind was racing. Frank was 95 and still working. Why was he still working at his age? Did he need the money? Was he struggling financially? Dennis felt terrible. Here he was, wealthy and successful, while the man who helped him get started was still working in his 90s. Dennis knew he had to do something, but first, he needed to see Frank. The next morning, Dennis called the college. He asked to speak with Frank Thompson. There was a pause on the line. Frank Thompson? Oh my goodness, you mean our Frank? He's here today. Hold on, let me get him. Dennis's hands were shaking as he waited. Then he heard a familiar voice, older but still warm. Hello, this is Frank. Frank, this is Dennis. Dennis Lillee. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Dennis heard a sharp intake of breath. Dennis? My boy? Is it really you? Both men were crying now. Decades of separation melted away in that moment. Frank, I can't believe you're still there. I tried to find you over the years. I thought maybe you had passed away. Oh no, my boy. I'm still here, still kicking. I've followed your career all these years. I'm so proud of you, Dennis. So very proud. They talked for over an hour. Frank wanted to know everything about Dennis's life, his family, his career, his retirement. Dennis wanted to know about Frank's life too. Frank told Dennis that he had lost his wife 5 years ago. His children lived far away. The college had become his second home. The students and staff were like family to him. But Frank, Dennis said, you're 95 years old. Why are you still working? Frank chuckled. I love it here, Dennis. These young people keep me young. And to be honest, I need the money. My pension isn't much, and medical bills add up. Dennis's heart broke. Here was the man who had helped him achieve his dreams, still working at 95 because he needed money to survive. Frank, I'm coming to see you. Tomorrow, can you meet me at the college? Of course, my boy. I'll be here. Dennis booked a flight to Perth that night. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to see Frank and figure out how to help him. The flight to Perth felt like the longest of Dennis's life. He kept thinking about Frank at 95, still mopping floors and cleaning classrooms. It wasn't right. Dennis had to do something. Dennis arrived at the college early the next morning. He was nervous and excited. It had been over 40 years since he had seen Frank. He walked through the familiar hallways. The college had changed a lot, but the basic structure was the same. Dennis found Frank in the maintenance room, just like old times. Frank looked older, of course, but his eyes were the same, bright and kind. When he saw Dennis, his face lit up with joy. Dennis, my boy. Frank struggled to stand up from his chair. Dennis rushed over and hugged him gently. Both men were crying. Other college staff members gathered around, amazed by the reunion. Dennis spent the whole day with Frank. They walked around the college together. Frank showed Dennis all the changes that had been made over the years. Students and staff were amazed to see the famous Dennis Lillee walking their hallways. But Dennis was more interested in learning about Frank's situation. What he discovered shocked him. Frank was working 20 hours a week at the college. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover his basic needs. His apartment was small and run down. His car was old and needed repairs. Frank had 3 adult children, but they lived in different cities and had their own financial struggles. They helped when they could, but it wasn't enough. The Social Security helps, Frank explained, but it doesn't cover everything. Medical bills are expensive when you're my age, but I don't mind working. I like feeling useful. Dennis learned that Frank had been struggling financially for years. He had too much pride to ask for help from anyone. He just quietly kept working, doing his best to get by. The college staff loved Frank. Everyone knew him and respected him. But Dennis realized that no one truly understood how difficult Frank's situation was. Frank was good at hiding his struggles. That evening, Dennis took Frank out for dinner at a nice restaurant. Frank protested that it was too expensive, but Dennis insisted. Over dinner, Frank told Dennis more about his life. He talked about his late wife, his children, and his grandchildren. He was proud of his family, even though he didn't see them often. I've had a good life, Dennis, Frank said. I've been blessed. I got to help young people like you. That's been my reward. Dennis was amazed by Frank's attitude. Even in his difficult situation, Frank remained positive and grateful. It made Dennis even more determined to help. That night, Dennis couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Frank's situation. A 95-year-old man shouldn't have to work to survive. Especially not Frank, who had helped so many people over the years. Dennis knew he had to do something big. Not just give Frank some money, but create a real solution. Something that would ensure Frank could live comfortably for the rest of his life. Dennis started making phone calls. He called his accountant, his lawyer, and his financial advisor. He wanted to set up something permanent for Frank. But Dennis also knew Frank's personality. Frank was proud and independent. He wouldn't accept charity easily. Dennis had to be smart about how he helped. The next morning, Dennis went back to the college to see Frank again. They sat in Frank's favorite spot in the maintenance room. "Frank," Dennis said, "I want to ask you something. What would make you happiest right now?" Frank thought for a moment. "Honestly, I'd love to not worry about money anymore. I'd love to be able to visit my children and grandchildren more often. And I'd love to keep helping young people, but maybe not by mopping floors." Dennis smiled. That was exactly what he hoped Frank would say. "What if I told you I have an idea that might make all of that possible?" Frank looked curious. "What kind of idea?" Dennis took a deep breath. "I want to set up a foundation that helps students who are struggling financially, just like I was, and I want you to be the person who decides who gets help." Frank's eyes widened. "Dennis, that's very generous, but I couldn't." "Hear me out," Dennis interrupted gently. "You have a gift, Frank. You can see potential in people. You saw it in me when I couldn't see it myself. There are probably dozens of students like I was, right here at this college, who need help." Frank was listening intently now. "The foundation would pay you a salary to identify and help these students. You'd be doing what you love most, helping young people, but in a bigger way, and you'd earn enough to live comfortably." Frank was quiet for a long time. Dennis could see the wheels turning in his head. "You'd really do that? Set up a whole foundation?" "Frank, you changed my life. You helped me become who I am today. This is the least I can do." Over the next few weeks, Dennis worked tirelessly to set up what he called the Frank Thompson Student Support Foundation. He invested a significant portion of his own money to get it started. The foundation had a simple mission: to identify and help students who had potential but were struggling financially, just like Dennis had been all those years ago. Dennis's lawyer helped create the legal structure. His accountant helped set up the financial systems, but Dennis wanted Frank to be involved in every decision. "This is your foundation, Frank," Dennis told him. "I'm just providing the money. You're the one who knows how to help people." Frank was overwhelmed by Dennis's generosity, but he was also excited. For the first time in years, he felt truly hopeful about the future. The college administration was thrilled about the foundation. They agreed to let Frank work directly with students and faculty to identify those who needed help. Dennis also made sure Frank was well taken care of personally. The foundation would pay Frank a generous salary, much more than he was making as a janitor. Dennis also set up a separate fund to cover Frank's medical expenses. But Dennis wasn't done yet. He had one more surprise for Frank. Dennis bought Frank a new car. Not a fancy sports car, but a reliable, comfortable sedan that would be easy for Frank to drive. When Dennis presented the keys to Frank, the old man broke down in tears. "Dennis, this is too much. I can't accept all this." "Frank, you gave me everything when I had nothing. You believed in me when no one else did. This isn't too much. This is just a small way to say thank you." Dennis also helped Frank move to a better apartment, a place that was comfortable and safe, with room for Frank's children and grandchildren to visit. The local newspaper got wind of the story and wanted to write an article about it. At first, Frank was reluctant. He didn't like being the center of attention. But Dennis convinced him. "Frank, your story might inspire other people to help. Imagine how many more students could benefit if other successful people follow this example." When the newspaper published the story about Dennis and Frank, the response was incredible. People from all over Australia were moved by the story. The article went viral on social media. People shared it thousands of times. Many readers were inspired by Frank's lifetime of quiet service and Dennis's gratitude. But the most amazing part was what happened next. Other successful people started reaching out to Dennis, wanting to contribute to the foundation. Former students from the technical college contacted Dennis. Many of them remembered Frank and wanted to help. Some had become successful in their own careers and wanted to give back. "Frank helped me too," one former student wrote to Dennis. "I want to contribute to the foundation." Within a month, the foundation had grown from Dennis's personal contribution to a much larger fund, supported by dozens of donors. Frank was amazed by the response. "I never knew I had touched so many lives," he told Dennis. "That's because you're humble, Frank. You never realized how much you meant to people." The college decided to name their Student Support Center after Frank. The Frank Thompson Student Success Center would be the headquarters for the foundation's work. At the naming ceremony, Frank was surrounded by hundreds of former students who had come to honor him. Many of them shared stories about how Frank had helped them during their college years. One woman stood up and said, "Frank saved my life. I was ready to drop out of college because I couldn't afford it. Frank found a way to help me stay. I'm a doctor now because of him." Another man said, "Frank gave me a job when I needed money for rent. But more than that, he gave me hope when I had none." Story after story like this came out. Dennis realized that Frank had been helping students for decades, long before Dennis ever met him, and long after Dennis had left. Frank was crying during most of the ceremony. He kept saying, "I was just doing my job." But everyone there knew it was much more than that. Frank had been an angel in disguise, helping countless young people achieve their dreams. 6 months after the foundation was established, it was helping over 50 students at the technical college. Frank was in his element, working directly with students who needed support. Frank had an office now, a real office with his name on the door, but he still spent most of his time walking around the college, talking to students and identifying those who needed help. The foundation provided different types of support. Some students needed help with tuition, others needed money for books or supplies, some needed help with living expenses. But Frank understood that students needed more than just money. They needed encouragement, guidance, and someone who believed in them. "Money is important," Frank told Dennis, "but hope is even more important." Frank would meet with each student personally. He would listen to their stories and help them make plans for success. He became a mentor and father figure to many of them. One student Frank helped was Maria, a single mother trying to become a nurse. She was struggling to balance school, work, and raising her 2 young children. Frank didn't just give Maria money for childcare. He helped her create a study schedule that worked with her family life. He connected her with other nursing students who could study with her. He even babysat her children occasionally so Maria could attend evening classes. When Maria graduated and became a registered nurse, she credited Frank with making it possible. "He didn't just help me financially," Maria said. "He helped me believe I could do it." Stories like Maria's were happening all over the college. Frank was changing lives, just like he had changed Dennis's life all those years ago. Dennis visited Frank regularly to see the foundation's work. Each visit filled Dennis with pride and happiness. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would do," Dennis told Frank. "You're changing lives." Frank would smile and say, "We're changing lives, Dennis. This is our work together." The foundation also created a scholarship program for students who showed exceptional promise but lacked resources. The first scholarship was awarded to a young man named Jake, who reminded Dennis a lot of himself at that age. Jake was passionate about engineering but was working 2 jobs to pay for school. The scholarship allowed Jake to focus on his studies and pursue an internship at a major engineering firm. As word spread about the Frank Thompson Student Support Foundation, other colleges and universities became interested in creating similar programs. Dennis and Frank were invited to speak at conferences about their approach to student support. Frank was nervous about public speaking at first, but Dennis encouraged him. "People need to hear your story, Frank. Your approach to helping students is special." Frank's first speaking engagement was at a conference of college administrators. He was supposed to speak for 20 minutes about identifying students who needed help. Frank spoke for over an hour. The audience was captivated by his wisdom and compassion. He received a standing ovation. After the conference, several colleges asked Frank to help them set up similar programs. Frank was thrilled to share his knowledge. "I never thought I'd be traveling around the country giving speeches," Frank laughed. "Life is full of surprises." Dennis helped Frank hire an assistant to manage his growing responsibilities. The assistant, Sarah, was a former student who Frank had helped years earlier. She was excited to work with Frank and give back to the foundation. The foundation also started tracking the success of the students it helped. The results were impressive. Over 90% of the students who received support from the foundation graduated from their programs. Many of these graduates went on to successful careers. Some became teachers, nurses, engineers, and business owners. A few even started their own companies. But the most rewarding part for Frank was the thank you letters he received from students and their families. One mother wrote, "My son was ready to give up on his education. Frank Thompson saved his future. Our whole family is grateful." Another letter said, "Frank saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. He didn't just give me money, he gave me confidence." These letters reminded Frank why his work was so important. Each student who succeeded was proof that kindness and support could change lives. Dennis often read these letters with Frank. Both men would get emotional seeing the impact of their work. "We're building something that will last long after we're gone," Dennis said. Frank nodded. "That's the best kind of legacy." As the foundation grew, it faced some challenges. Managing more money and helping more students required better systems and more staff. Dennis hired professional fund managers to handle the foundation's investments. He wanted to make sure the money would be there for students for many years to come. Frank initially worried about the foundation becoming too big and impersonal. "I don't want to lose touch with the students," he told Dennis. Dennis understood Frank's concern. Together, they created policies to make sure the foundation would always maintain Frank's personal approach to helping students. They established satellite programs at other colleges, but each program had to follow Frank's model of personal mentorship and individualized support. Frank also insisted on visiting each new program location personally. At 96, he was still traveling around the country, meeting with students and staff. "Age is just a number," Frank would say. "As long as I can help young people, I'll keep going." The foundation faced some criticism too. A few people questioned whether it was fair to help some students and not others. Frank took these criticisms seriously. "We can't help everyone," Frank acknowledged. "But we help as many as we can, and we help them in the right way." Frank developed clear criteria for selecting students to help. The foundation focused on students who showed dedication and potential but lacked resources. Students had to maintain good grades and participate in mentorship programs. The foundation also started offering workshops on financial literacy, study skills, and career planning. Frank believed in giving students tools for long-term success, not just short-term help. One of the workshops Frank was most proud of was called Believing in Yourself. Frank taught this workshop personally at several colleges. "I've learned that many students don't lack ability," Frank would tell workshop participants. "They lack confidence. Once you believe in yourself, amazing things become possible." These workshops were always full. Students loved Frank's wisdom and warmth. Many said the workshop was as valuable as any class they took in college. The foundation also created an alumni network for students it had helped. These former students could mentor current students and even contribute back to the foundation. This created a cycle of giving that Frank loved. "Students we helped 5 years ago are now helping today's students," he told Dennis. "That's how you build a real community." In 2021, Frank Thompson received the Order of Australia Medal for his lifetime of service to education and young people. The ceremony was held in Canberra, and Dennis was there to watch Frank receive the honor. Frank, now 97, walked slowly to the stage to receive his medal. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. In his acceptance speech, Frank was characteristically humble. "This award isn't just for me," he said. "It's for all the teachers, janitors, administrators, and support staff who help students every day. We all play a part in young people's success." After the ceremony, reporters wanted to interview Frank and Dennis. Their story had become nationally known, and people were still inspired by it. "What advice do you have for other successful people who want to give back?" a reporter asked Dennis. "Look for the Frank Thompsons in your life," Dennis replied. "The people who helped you when you needed it most. Then find a way to honor their example by helping others." Frank was asked what advice he had for young people who were struggling. "Never give up on your dreams," Frank said. "And remember that there are people who want to help you succeed. Don't be too proud to accept help when it's offered." The foundation also received recognition. It was named the Outstanding Student Support Program by the Australian Education Association. But the recognition Frank treasured most came from the students themselves. The college created a wall of thank you letters from students Frank had helped. The wall was covered with hundreds of messages. Frank would often sit in front of this wall and read the letters. Each one reminded him why his work mattered. One letter that particularly moved Frank was from a student named David who had graduated 5 years earlier. "Dear Mr. Thompson," the letter read, "I wanted you to know that I just got promoted to supervisor at my job. I thought about you today because I remember when I couldn't even afford lunch. You didn't just help me financially, you taught me that people can be good to each other for no reason except kindness. I try to be that kind of person for others now. Thank you for everything." Reading letters like this made Frank feel like the richest man in the world, even though he had spent most of his life with very little money. Dennis often found Frank reading these letters. "Never gets old, does it?" Dennis would ask. "Never," Frank would reply with a smile. "This is better than any trophy or award." In early 2022, Frank had a health scare that worried everyone who cared about him. At 98, he collapsed at the college and was rushed to the hospital. Dennis got the call while he was at home in Melbourne. He immediately flew to Perth to be with Frank. Frank was in the hospital for a week. Doctors said he had pneumonia and was severely dehydrated. At his age, this was serious. The college was flooded with get well cards for Frank. Students, staff, and alumni all wanted Frank to know they were thinking about him. Dennis stayed by Frank's bedside every day. The two old friends had long conversations about life, family, and the foundation. "I'm worried about what will happen to the foundation if something happens to me," Frank told Dennis. "The foundation will continue," Dennis assured him. "We've built something strong, but more importantly, you need to focus on getting better." Frank's recovery was slow but steady. The hospital staff were amazed by his determination. Even in his weakened condition, Frank was asking about his students at the college. "He keeps asking if anyone needs help with their studies," one nurse told Dennis. "He's more worried about his students than himself." When Frank was finally released from the hospital, Dennis insisted that he take time to rest and recover, but Frank had other ideas. "I feel fine," Frank protested. "The students need me." Dennis and Frank's family had to negotiate with him. Frank agreed to work reduced hours and let his assistant Sarah handle more responsibilities. The health scare made Dennis realize how precious Frank was and how much the foundation depended on him. Dennis accelerated plans to document Frank's methods and wisdom so they could be preserved for future foundation workers. Dennis hired a professional writer to interview Frank and create a guidebook for helping students. The book would capture Frank's philosophy and approach so that others could continue his work. Frank enjoyed the interview process. "It's nice to think that my ideas might help people even after I'm gone," he said. The guidebook was called The Frank Thompson Method, a lifetime of helping students succeed. It became required reading for all foundation staff and volunteers. Frank's health scare also brought his family closer together. His children and grandchildren visited more often, making up for lost time. "I realize now that we took Dad for granted." Frank's son Michael told Dennis, "We thought he'd always be there, working at that college. We didn't understand how important his work was or how much people needed him." As Frank approached his 99th birthday, Dennis knew they needed to plan for the foundation's future without Frank. It was a difficult conversation, but a necessary one. "Frank, we need to talk about succession planning," Dennis said gently during one of their weekly meetings. Frank nodded. "I've been thinking about that too. I won't be around forever." Together, they identified several people who could carry on Frank's work. Sarah, Frank's assistant, was the obvious choice to lead day-to-day operations. She had learned Frank's methods and shared his compassion for students. They also identified several college counselors and former students who understood the foundation's mission and could help guide it. Dennis increased the foundation's endowment significantly, ensuring it would have enough money to operate for decades to come. But Frank insisted on one important element for the future. Whoever leads this foundation must spend time with students personally. They can't just sit in an office and approve funding. They have to know the students they're helping. Dennis agreed completely. They wrote this requirement into the foundation.